All right, Josh Smith here, live at my Flat 5 studios. Today's my guest is a new friend, but someone I've admired for a long time. Just a prolific musician. Man, I've been following you, God, 20 years, more than that. I just remember seeing how hard you always worked, which was something that's important to me. You were always putting in the effort and time to have your own bands, your own work, but then you were out producing, you were touring, playing sideman, but you were always made time for your own stuff, which was really influential for me, honestly, because when I moved out here to LA, I had given up on my own thing and was just going to do the sideman thing. And there was guys like you who kind of showed me, man, you could do all of this at the same time. You could produce records and, put out your own records and still do sessions and do sideman stuff. So, dude, I'm a huge fan of your playing, and I'm glad that we've connected now and that you live out here. Hopefully we get to do more together. But everybody, please welcome Eric Krasno.
Man, thank you so much for that intro. And I have to say, you're one of my favorite players. I know we'd met in a couple capacities, but when I really kind of in the last couple of years found you, actually through a good friend of mine, Danny Mayer, and he showed me some of your videos, and I started following you, and then kind of went down the rabbit hole, and I was like, man, this is a dude has so much taste in his playing and so much soul in his playing and so much technical ability. I just love when all those things combine, and you really have your own voice, but really respect your playing and like your choices as a player.
Thanks, man. That's really kind of you, man. I feel like you and I have a lot of similarities to probably our upbringings to some degree, and the way we got started and the way we've gone about things. But I kind of start all these by asking everybody the family history, because for me, I don't have a very musical family. Certainly nobody plays guitar. It was really random how the guitar ended up in my hands. How did the guitar end up in your hands first?
Well, I definitely had a musical family. Like music was around. My grandfather played violin and piano, played like gypsy music primarily. He actually made records. He was a surgeon, but he also made records, and later in his life got more serious about music. But music was always a huge part of his life. My dad was a casual musician, but had jam sessions at the house and stuff. So there was guitars around. I took some like violin lessons as a young child. But so I have an older brother though that's 5.5 years older, and it wasn't until really he started having bands and playing, like they would play in the basement and jam, and there started to be a setup down there, and that's when I really wanted to hang. It was really about like wanting to hang with the older kids, and I went down there and started messing around when they'd be playing, and they'd be like, "Hey man, you got to like practice first," So. I had this little rig in my room that was like a record player, and and I don't know if you ever remember these. I can't remember what brand it was, Sherwood or something like that. But you could plug in. It had an input as well as a headphone out, and it had a tape deck. Yeah. So I could play like Led Zeppelin records. Play along. I mean, it sounded horrible. It was an input, so no amp or anything. It was just like on like a guitar with 2 strings missing, and I could play along and record myself. So this was like, it sounds so basic, but as a kid, that was the coolest thing ever. So I like started being able to play along with records, and that really was it, man. I would play along with records, and I remember coming back to the basement. And I think I came down there and started playing as many of us have probably had a similar experience. But Led Zeppelin was really it for me. It was like Led Zeppelin, and then that bled into Hendrix and Stevie Ray Vaughan and like the Grateful Dead and so many different things. It was just like this gateway, and I became kind of obsessed, and then I had like my few close friends, and we would trade records and trade tapes and make mixes for each other. And it just became this like world that I couldn't really imagine living without. It's kind of just was everything from then on,
Yeah, the obsession is real, and it takes over fast.
Yeah.
The record player thing, the recording thing is funny that you said that. So I had a Sony stereo that was I wanted it more than anything for my bar mitzvah was to
Yeah,
get a
yeah,
big tall stereo with the glass door, and so I got it, and it could do. I didn't have an input for a guitar, but it had like a I think it had like a built-in microphone. It was like for voiceover or something like
right,
that.
right.
And I did the same. I would put my amp tilted towards it, my little Gorilla
Yeah,
practice amp,
I had the same. I had a gorilla at one
fire
point. Yeah,
into it, and play over Hendrix and Allman Brothers and BB King, and and
yeah,
just play along. But dude, think about like all those hours on the edge of your bed. I mean, so you had your brother and older guys down in the basement playing.
yeah.
That you were. It was almost like you had a goal to get down there and play with those guys,
Absolutely.
which even pushed you quicker. But man, I mean the countless hours on the end of the bed. That's what I hear and what I think back to the most when I look at all the guys that we are contemporaries with and we see and whatever, just in general. I just see the hours, man. The hours on the end of the bed playing. It's
Yeah,
never ending.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then got into recording too. I mean, I can track it back to that, and then having like the double tape deck and recording myself, and that evolved into getting like a little 4 track. And I was always obsessed with records. And reading. My dad had a pretty big record collection, and I was so interested in what people did. Like what does a producer do? What does the engineer do? Who wrote the songs? What is the writing process like? I was so into that and reading the credits and who played on what. Oh, and this guy also played on this record. And that was how I would find different things. And it was like the never ending rabbit hole from there. And then I was always into producing. I always wanted to learn about that. And when I went to school, that was my focus, was like I wanted to play, but I kind of saw this path of producing and making records as this really cool thing I wanted to do. And then Soul Live kind of just happened,
Right.
And took me on this other path. But it was cool because when Soul Live, I'm skipping a lot of stuff, but when Soul Live got to work in the studio and got signed to Blue Note, we got to work with all these amazing people, and that was like better than any sort of school in terms of producing and being in all of a sudden to be in like Avatar or Power Station and be working with Basie Bob and Fred Wesley arranging the horns. I was like 23 years old and getting to work with like all the best in their field, Bob Power, and like I just soaked it up, man. It was like I got to go to school with the best guys, and I was the first guy there, the last guy to leave. I wanted to learn about the board and every compressor and everything that was there. And that was huge for me because then I got to just kind of build these skills, slowly but surely, but like got to, work with the best guys, which was such a
Yeah.
blessing, man.
Well, so before you went to college, what was like the high school years like? Do you have a lot of friends who were playing that you were hanging out with? Were you doing any gigs during that time, or was there any music in school even during that time?
So I went to a very small school. It was a boarding school in Vermont. My parents split when I was pretty young. They were
Okay.
both very, very career driven. And I ended up going to a school called the Putney School in Vermont, in the middle of nowhere.
Okay.
And it was a very artsy school, but the music program was pretty small. But what they did was they let us do these big projects. Like they'd have, like, instead of exam week, they had project week where you had to do an academic project and a creative project. So early on in there, I basically let them, they kind of gave me this studio room. There wasn't really any equipment in it, but I, found random equipment from different places. The 4-track became an 8-track cassette, and I find an old mixing board. I had like this weird Tascam 8-channel mixer, and I just started like building this weird little quirky studio. But there weren't a lot of musicians around. I remember my roommate at the time wasn't really a drummer, but had a drum kit, and just the fact that he had a drum kit, he became my drummer.
Right.
You know what I mean? And like he played like, double kick, like metal at first, or that's what he had the kit for. But then he was like, oh, like, and I play him Herbie Hancock records and stuff like that. And like we were like a really bad funk band. But what I got to do was I got to learn about making songs and making recordings, because even though a lot of it was just me, like I would eke out a drum part and play bass and play guitar and try to sing or whatever. And so I'd say that in those days I really got to do that. And then I went to the 5-week program at Berkeley one of the summers in high school, and that's where I met the Lettuce guys. So
Right.
that was when I found like my guys. I was like, oh man, there's other 16-year-olds that are this into music, and they're way better than me. You know what I mean? Like I remember meeting Adam Deitch, and I was and Adam Smirnoff and those guys, and Eric Coombs and Ryan Zoidis. That was like the nucleus of the band Lettuce, and we met in the summer of '92. And we were little kids, and I just couldn't believe there was other kids like me, because in my town growing up, or at the school I went to, there was kids that were like messing around with music, but not like the way they were. They were unbelievably talented, and that's when and also they schooled me on music, because they all of a sudden, it was like Zoidis played me every Tower Power record. Deitch was super into like Earth, Wind and Fire, you know what I mean, and learning about we all had the common thread was Herbie Hancock. We were all like obsessed with Headhunters, Thrust, and that whole era of Herbie in the funk years.
Right.
And we were just obsessed with it. So we just started playing together and jamming together. And that's when I caught the bug of like, okay, I want to be in a band,
Yeah.
too. But previous to that, I was like, oh, I want to make records, or I want to like, but then I was like, oh man, being in a band, there's nothing like it. So
Like, dude, I can't imagine like at that age finding guys so like-minded, because it's like you said, where I grew up, big city, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, plenty of musicians my age, even in my middle school and high school, but they certainly were not listening to B.B. King and Charlie
Yeah.
Parker and Grant Green, you know what I mean, and Earth, Wind and Fire.
Right.
They were listening to Nirvana and Metallica, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
that's what was hip at the time. And so when I would get together with guys my age, I couldn't relate musically in any way,
Yeah.
And in fact, like when I met Derek Trucks, he was one of the first guys I met my age who was like into the music I liked, and he was
Right.
already gigging. So it was like, man, well, you should just forget about playing with guys your age. Just go gig, because I saw
Yeah.
him do it.
Yeah.
But dude, I can't imagine how great that must have felt to like wander into Berkeley during that summer break and find a bunch of guys your age, and just you all end up influencing each other and pushing each other.
I mean, the craziest thing is that those are the guys I still play with and talk to, and are, we work together to this day, which is so crazy if you think, 30 years later almost, those are my guys. So I was very fortunate to meet them, and they pushed me. I mean, that summer I went from like not knowing anything to being like, oh, okay, I can play, or I can at least like get by,
Right.
and that was very much due to them schooling me. It's different when you have peers pushing you versus like teachers, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And of course it's important to have both, but when you have peers that are like your friends, and like you push each other constantly, you know what I mean? It's like, I just was watching this the 3-2-1 McCartney. I don't know if you've seen that on Hulu.
I haven't started it yet.
Dude, it's so good. Rick Rubin and McCartney. And McCartney has this one scene where he's like, oh man, me, John, and George we'd learn a new chord, and we'd show it to the other guy. So we always knew the next guy, and someone had to learn a new chord and show that. And he was like, I was at a music store, and this like jazz guy played this chord, and I made him teach it to me. I went back and I showed it to the other guys, and it was a sharp 9. And then he goes, and then he wrote Michelle, like off of that chord, kind of,
Wow.
which I never even realized that was a sharp 9 actually. But and that was such a cool story to me, because I could so relate to that. Like, oh man, I got a new chord and I'm gonna play it all the time now, and
Yeah.
then showing that to the homies, and then like Schmeens like me and him show each other so many things. You know, he would show me all because he had such incredible rhythm chops and he could move chords everywhere, you know, and he would always show me something and then I would like practice it for days, but I'd always have to come back with something new to show him, you know, and that was like this thing that it's such a cool way to challenge yourself when you have, you know, people around you like that, you know.
Yeah. So then what happens then after that summer program when you go back to Vermont, to that school?
I was so we at the end of that summer we all basically were like, all right, we're gonna come here. We were all the same age except Zoidis was a year older. So we all decided. Oh, actually, him and Schmeens and Smirnoff, but we all decided we were going to go to Berkeley when we graduated high school. And I didn't really. It was before cell phones and email and all that. So
Sure.
I wasn't even really in touch with them. But when we came back in '94, fall '94, we all were there and we were all in the same dorm. So.
Wow.
Yeah, I had stayed in touch with Adam Deitch. I think I had went to his house the next year, or I can't remember the timeline exactly, but I know that we all ended up in school there, and that's when we kind of started the band. I mean, it wasn't really a band till like a real band till many years later, but that's what we started playing local gigs at like frats and basement parties and house parties and stuff like that.
That's crazy, man. Yeah, I mean, think back to no cell phones and no email. It's like, how do you keep in touch with all those guys as they scatter around the country?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, crazy. Man, so what did your parents think? Because they probably were very supportive in general, but when not just the summer program Berkeley is the thing, it's like, okay, now I'm going to go to Berkeley. This is what I'm going to do. Were they super into it or cautious,
I would say a little cautious, but for the most part, I couldn't have ended up with a better situation in terms of support. My mom was an artist, visual artist, and my dad has always been in education, but his dad was a musician, and he loved music. I mean, my dad is very musical. It kind of wasn't an option for him when he was a kid to become a musician, but he was like, he played piano, mandolin, and so like he appreciated it all so much. So yeah, I mean, they were very supportive. I've always been very fortunate in that way. And yeah, I went to school. I went to Berkeley first. I ended up leaving Berkeley and going to Hampshire College is where I studied. And I studied with a guy named Yusef Latif there, which was amazing for me. And then pretty much right when I graduated, we formed Soul Live my senior year of college. So like right when I graduated, we like hit the road. So I was fortunate in that way that I didn't have the like, okay, what do I do now thing. It was kind of like as soon as I was, able to hit the road, I did. In fact, really before we were already like, doing shows like 3-4 nights a week. And so yeah, it was a pretty quick after that to like just playing shows all the time. And, those were the days of like, just grinding it in the van and you just, we didn't care. We just wanted to play.
Well, yeah, I mean that time when you're young and you don't have a lot of responsibility and it doesn't take a lot of money to live, and also you're kind of bulletproof. Like you can stay up all night and drive all day and not get tired. And, like, yeah, I miss that, but also I really don't miss that at all, like,
yeah.
But you get so much, I mean, and you grow just leaps and bounds once you start doing that stuff.
Yeah, those were the years, man. It's so funny because I listened back. We just released like our first session ever because the very first time Soul Live got together, Alan and Neil had already formed the band, and but they only played one gig with the other guy. They had a vibraphone player originally, and I was at the first gig because I was friends with them already, and I sat in, and then that guy left the band like shortly after. They booked all these shows. And they were like, man, you want to come out here to Woodstock where they had like a house with a little studio and play. And that first day, I had a couple song ideas. They had some songs. We had a little ADAT machine. We recorded ourselves playing. And that is our first EP that we like toured off of and became an album. And we ended up re-releasing that on vinyl recently. And I listened back to myself. And it was just like, oh my God, I can't like, because then like even a year later, or not even, we made Turn It Out, which is like the album that I've listened to at least. And like that one has
Sure.
Schofield on it and O'Teal Burbridge and all like that one, like we were really a band. But the difference between that first session and just being on the road, like, I don't know, 7, 8 months was night and day. I mean,
Oh yeah.
just my playing, my choices, my tone. I mean, I still would change a lot from that latter record, but it's yeah, man. There's nothing like being out on the road, like you obviously shedding is great, training in every way is great, but playing gigs, there's just nothing like it.
Dude, and especially when you're young and
Yeah,
fertile, I guess, it
yeah.
happens so fast. So during pandemic, I've been digitizing. My parents sent me boxes of VHSs of all my gigs from
Oh wow.
13 to 20, you know what I mean? And like literally hundreds of them because I played so many gigs. But I've been just like picking choice ones and digitizing them into my computer, and it's like every 3 months I sound like a different player, and
Wow.
it's crazy watching the progression go, but it's because we were so obsessed with it, and it was every waking moment, every little second was spent bettering ourselves, and yeah, like you said, the amount of gigs you guys played, there's no substitute. Like it's not the
Yeah.
same as shedding or doing any even rehearsing. It's not the same. It's like when you
Yeah.
just play a bunch of gigs, you can't help but grow so fast.
It's crazy. And then the funny thing too is like I can't play some of the shit I was playing at the height of that stuff. The other night, this guy sent me a video of me playing with the Benevento Russo duo in like
Uh huh.
20 something years ago. And it's right when Soul Live was touring all the time. And also, I was just playing more notes. I was playing
Yeah.
more like bebop stuff, and
Yeah.
I will say I think I make better choices now. But there was like some stuff in the video where I'm like, I could never play that now. Like this, like these runs, I was like, I don't know if I'd want to either. But
Right.
like, it's just funny. Like I was just playing all the time. I mean, I still love to play, and I play every day, but it's just different. It's different now.
It is different.
Responsibilities, we got kids, we got things.
Well, certainly that changes things. So this is an interesting thing for me. So where we split, I think somewhere is, I was doing all that stuff, blues in the van, no responsibilities, kicking my ass, just trying to make it happen. And then I got married and I had a kid pretty young, and that's
Yeah,
when I moved here to LA with the purpose, of hey, I'm gonna just be a working guitar player. I'm gonna go get a job, get a gig,
right.
tour, do sessions, and it worked out, which is fortunate. But it did change my path a lot. It made me a better musician, and I learned a whole bunch of skills that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. But it was different than kind of staying doing your own thing. When you guys had that band, well, really two bands, but especially Soul Live for so long, that was like your singular focus. How did you find it when you kind of started to shift off into doing more of the production and the session stuff that you started to do? Was it natural, or did it feel like you were like cheating on the band or something? I don't know.
It's interesting because I was doing it all along, actually.
Okay.
But a lot of people don't know because, I mean, honestly, before social media, too, it was kind of like
Right.
no one. It's funny how, like, me doing a podcast, all of a sudden people are like, oh man, you produce records? I'm like, yeah, I've been producing records for 25 years. But yeah, I mean, I made a bunch of records in those early years that Soul Live was touring. I mean, of course, it wasn't like my number one thing, but did a lot of hip hop stuff. I mean, I was doing a lot of hip hop sessions, some pop records and stuff like that. But yeah, it never was really. There was a time like really in 2005, 2006. That was when I had to kind of make a choice, and I moved to LA for a little while during that time. I just done a song for 50 Cent's record, which was a huge record,
Mhm.
and I was getting in with all these people at Interscope and was like contemplating signing this deal with them as a producer. And I remember I was like kind of in like the waiting period of meeting with Dr. Dre to kind of take the seat of like being one of the guys in his camp. And
Sure.
but it also required me signing something. And long story short, I had to leave to go back to a Soul Live tour, and that time Soul Live was doing pretty well. Like, I mean, I think our that run we were doing like 9:30 Club in DC, Irving Plaza. It was like a New Year's run. A lot of them were sold out shows, and I left, and then finally they were like, okay, we need you for this session, and I had been waiting for days. And you know how that works. It's like,
Yeah.
especially in those days, people would pay for studio time for weeks. I'd
Yeah.
be there and no one would be working, you know. Meanwhile, I'm in a band where like, okay, we got studio for a day, we got 10 tunes, you know.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I'm here, I'm early, I got my coffee, I'm waiting, and by like day 3 or 4, I had to leave. And they did not understand the fact that I was like, they were like, well, get a sub for your gig. I'm like, no, this is my band. You're like, there's no sub. You know, there's no sub for this band. There's 3 of us. So I remember that moment, making that decision of being like, okay, you know, do I want to be, and I think being a producer is like the greatest thing in the world. But I kind of got to this moment where I was like, do I want to like wait on other people to do shit all the time, or do I want to like go where people appreciate me for doing what because like they could replace me on that session easily,
Sure.
but I was not replaceable in my band, you know. And I remember that was like a kind of a defining moment for me, because I kind of came back to the East Coast and I was like, okay, I'm going to be in my bands and do my thing, and also I want to be a producer, but I want to be producing things that, because also when I moved to LA, and I think this is probably unique to my situation, but a lot of the sessions were not really fulfilling to me. You know, it wasn't like the music I wanted to be making. You know, it was kind of like, and they didn't care. There wasn't a lot of love for what I was doing. I mean, people were, once I had a song that was like hitting, they were like, all right, we fuck with you. But it also was kind of like, oh, you can't do that. All right, next, you know? So I just remember being kind of like, okay, you know, if I'm going to like build up my, you know, production credits, it's going to be in my own path, and it's going to have to be shit that I really love. And I also really loved the art of making an album, you know, and making a whole record. And at that time, people were hiring producers to do cuts. You know, it was all about getting it. And so I remember that was when we formed Royal Family Records. I signed Nigel, produced Nigel's record. We ended up calling it Feel Records because we couldn't get the name Royal Family. Long story, and then I started producing like the London Souls and bands that I was finding that were playing clubs or not even playing clubs, and I like was passionate about what they were doing that people didn't know.
Right.
And that was like something that meant a lot to me, because I was helping them, you know, define their sound, you know, versus like trying to like get in on something that was really hot and like trying to be the, you know, trying to break through, you know, where all these other producers were lined up. So that, you know, that's kind of been my MO ever since. I mean, I got to produce Aaron Neville's record and a bunch of other things kind of from that, but I needed my calling card first. You know what I mean? I needed to be like, okay, I produced these records. This is how they sound. And then I kind of started making my own records, because I was like, you know, I was writing so many songs for people, and I was doing the demos and kind of squeaking out these vocals for the demos. But then people started kind of encouraging me and being like, well, these demos why don't you just record these songs? These are your songs, you know? So when I made Blood from a Stone, that record was really made up of songs that initially I thought other people were going to sing. And then I was like, okay, you know what? I can sing these. And then it's been kind of an evolution or a kind of a learning process since then of just making my own records. And it's been great. And then building bands around that. It's the hardest thing in the world to do. I mean, I remember going out on tour after Blood from a Stone came out, kind of expecting people to know the music, and everybody in the crowd was like, play Soul Live.
Right.
So it's been years of like, kind of like working this stuff out and, you know, trying to build an audience and also just build up my skills, you know, as a songwriter, as a singer. And I still don't consider myself a great singer, but, you know, really just trying to create a vibe. That's the whole thing. It's like, and you know this, it's like not about singing acrobatic licks. It's about bringing something that's your own thing, you know?
Can you put it across or not? What you,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, so how do you balance it now? Like, when you're, I mean, obviously we're in a weird time now with the pandemic,
Yeah.
so it's all moot anyways. But, when you're planning your schedule normally, and you've got whatever, whether it be Soul Live stuff or Lettuce stuff or your own solo stuff and records, do you just let it all kind of take care of itself and the projects that get presented to you, you schedule what comes, or do you kind of try to split your year in a certain way?
Man, I wish I had a science to it. But I think in the last couple years I've started to prioritize, and I have a record coming out in well, we just pushed it back beginning of next year, and
Mhm.
that I'm going to tour behind that record, and I'm kind of like mapping out how to hit the whole country over a series of months, and so that's really the priority for me at the moment. And then I have like I do musical directing gigs where I've got like kind of 3 or 4 of those I do a year that I work with a few different production companies, and those are great, and I get to do those and kind of map those out throughout the year. So I kind of have like my things that are like defined for the year. Like I want to do a tour behind, if I have a record coming out or with my band. And then Soul Live does very little, but we kind of map our stuff out pretty far in advance too. um, we could do like 3 nights, and we kind of do the like 2-3 nights in one city type of thing, so we're
Mhm.
never really on the road. We fly in, we do 3 shows, and we're home, and we won't have another gig for months usually.
Right.
So
Right.
it kind of has whittled itself down to those 3 kind of things. And I don't tour with Lettuce anymore. Lettuce
Right.
kind of in the mid 2000s started ramping up their touring to like full time for the band, and that's when and we're all on good terms, and it's
Oh
all
yeah.
love. I mean, I still
You can
make,
only do so much, man.
yeah, but at that point, I was starting to produce a lot, and actually, and I also ended up going out on the road with Tedeschi Trucks playing bass during that time. So it was like there was just a lot going on, and but I mean, those are my boys, and I still made a lot. I'm not on the most recent record, but I still made records with them after that. Um, yeah, and then as far as producing, man, I just during the pandemic started figuring out a little bit of a rhythm with certain people where we do like Zoom writing, and then I had a couple people that were like in my pod that I like worked with in my studio, but for the most part did satellite recording. And I work with a guy named Otis McDonald, who's a really great engineer, drummer, producer, kind of multi instrumentalist, and he and I have been working a ton with each other. We use this thing called Pedal, which allows us to like have like hear our full on high def audio from our studios ran through with, and we can video. And
Right.
so it's almost in real time. Like it's great for mixing and editing.
Mhm.
If I can't like record with him playing drums, like, and me playing guitar
Yeah, of
live,
course.
but
Yeah.
we have like a thing that works. He'll put down the drum track, I'll put a bass track down, and it's become a thing that works. We did my whole record, that my newest record, that way. And then we're producing a few other artists right now, um, which has been working really well. It's kind of weird because we were like, oh man, we can't wait till we can actually be in a room together. And then like fast forward 6 months, and we're like, we could be in a room together, but this is kind of nice because I'm in my flip flops and my sweatpants in my backyard, and so are you, and so this is kind of easy, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's crazy because it's something that I've had to over the last 4 or 5 years kind of figure out how to balance out the producing thing with my own thing,
Yeah,
and I really struggle with like splitting the year because it's so hard to, like you said, like if you're going to put out a record and try to book a tour, to make that work around when people want to make records and
right.
need to make records. And it's like, well, I really like making those records and I need the money and it's
Yeah.
fun and all that. It's so hard to balance out. It's something I'm still kind of coming to grips with and figuring it out.
Honestly, every day is a different. Like one day I'm like, oh, I just want to make records, and the next day, oh, I want to play. But
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, both of us are in a good predicament in terms of, because I really, what I have realized is that I need a little bit of both. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And if I can balance it in a way where I'm not killing myself and staying as healthy as I can and spending time with the family. That's important. I think the biggest thing for me is kind of plotting it out with enough time where I can like be reasonable with it, you know.
Well, and the unsaid thing is, dude, like even the record you just sent it to me, so I haven't listened yet.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I know I can guarantee without even listening, you wouldn't have made the record you just made for yourself if you hadn't produced and done all the other things you've done the last whatever 5-10 years, because it's made you better at every step of the chain. And that's the thing I really enjoy the most about the producing is like, man, I learned something on every one of these records. Not just about how to get the best record for the artist that I'm producing, but stuff that just makes me way better at being me and brings new shit to my game. And that's so fun. Like, I love that aspect of it.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think working with different people all the time, that combined with challenging yourself to find new sounds. I mean, that's why I love producing so much. You get to kind of like go to a place musically that you never would otherwise, you know, working with new artists. And yeah, that's such an like hitting playback on something that you're creating, like right when it gets to that moment of like where it really gets there. There's nothing like that feeling, man. There's nothing like that feeling.
There really isn't, man. It's a great feeling. All right, let's jump into the 10 questions.
All right, let's do it.
All right. Number one, man, when you first started learning and playing, do you remember the first riff or lick or something that you got under your fingers that once you it came out correctly, it's like we all know that feeling, I can't believe I did this. That's it. No going back, you know?
Yeah. I'm going to pick one. I mean, I know exactly what it is. I've always known what it was, and it's kind of the classic. I feel like it's Wayne's World, but Over the Hills and Far Away by Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I felt like that one was so meant for my finger. Like it was just one of those ones. It was like with the open G, and that's why I was so into Jimmy Page, because not only did I love what he did, but I felt like I could pull it off. Not that I could pull off like the super complex shit right away, but it was like he was like soulful but sloppy, but like came up with the coolest parts. So yeah, that's it. That's the first one.
Yeah, that would be one. Like, I mean, because it's not even just that's like such a part. It's a song. I mean, all in its own. And yeah, I can imagine getting that under your fingers right away and just being like, it's like a magic trick. It's like you learned a magic trick. Yeah.
Also, it's a great joke for Dad, because once I played it 500 times, he goes, "Can you do that Over the Hills and Far Away?"
Nice.
I had to throw a dad joke in. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, man. Okay, so then along those same lines, do you remember the first solo that you ever learned note for note, or that turned you out so much that you had to learn it, you know?
Man, which one is it? That's a good question, because I feel like there was a few around that same time. But, you know, Jerry Garcia, I think it's from Fire on the Mountain.
Okay.
Is that one that goes bo bo ba do 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 do. It's like all Mixolydian, and I was like, oh, what is that scale? You know, it kind of introduced me to Mixolydian. So I think that's the song from Fire on the Mountain, the solo in there.
What's amazing about the solos are it could be 20 years removed from when you learned it, and you may have never played it again.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. Like spend 10 seconds of effort kind of thinking about it again, and it comes right back. Like mine is, besides like some B.B. King stuff and Albert King, the one that it doesn't matter how many years go by between when I play it or don't is fucking Angus Young, You Shook Me All Night Long.
Oh, yeah.
I remember learning that like so early, probably 10 years old. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The other one I remember, and I couldn't pull off like the whole thing, but the intro piece to Heartbreaker. You know, which really is like probably, it's kind of like it's like kind of a Freddie King lick, right? Or like it's like I don't know where he got that from, but then he goes into the you know thing. But that beginning was so powerful, and it's just him, you know, that moment.
Yeah, it is kind of a Freddie King thing.
Yeah,
now that you say it, at least the very beginning of
it. The very beginning, yeah.
All right, number 3. What's the first thing you play when you pick up a guitar? Do your hands just autopilot go somewhere?
Yeah, I kind of have a couple things. Well, it depends if I'm checking out an amp. Like I kind of have this like sound check kind of thing that I do. That's like
Yeah.
not something I ever play in a gig. It's kind of like well, it's like a majory kind of off of a Stevie Ray Lenny kind of thing that I do.
Mhm.
That like kind of just to hear the resonance of the amp and feel like where it's gonna go. I could know within like half a second if it's like gonna be if I'm gonna have a good relationship with the amp or not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I can tell right away if it's gonna be good. I'll tell you that much. You know,
Yep.
and then yeah, and then you know a lot of times I'm battling with backline amps, unfortunately. But
Oh, dude, we all have that thing on the backline amps when we first hit standby and
yeah,
play something in it, within 4 seconds, like,
yeah,
nope, this is gonna suck, Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. What about like if you're in a music store and you want to check a guitar, maybe even just
Yeah.
unplugged, to see if it's kind of got something? How quickly do you know if it's something you'll dig or not?
Oh yeah, I know pretty quick. I can tell like from the neck if I'm gonna dig it. Sometimes, you know, it really depends on what I'm trying to get out of it, but yeah, I can know if I'm gonna be in love with it real fast.
Real fast,
Yeah.
without plugging it in.
Definitely without plugging it in.
Yep,
Definitely without
normally the
plugging it in.
thing is. All right, number 4. What key, style, song, groove, whatever, is kind of like your personal narration while you're just like whatever, if you're cooking eggs or you're walking down the street? So I've got a swing or a shuffle pretty much that lives in my head 24 hours a day. And
Yeah.
I'm swinging in B flat. I just hear it all the time. What most often pops in
That's
there for
really
you?
funny. That's so funny because that's always happening in my mind, but I never talk about that. But um, yeah, I mean, it's basically Soul Serenade. Boom, ba-doom,
Better, better.
da-dum, you know?
Okay. Yeah.
Like the 1 to the 4. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just always there. You know, the 1 to the
Yeah.
4 is just always going on in my head. You know what I mean? And that's like life. It's like the 1 to the 4, and then from there it's like all the like accoutrement. But you need
Yeah.
the 1 to the 4 is just that's where that's the meat and potatoes.
Funny, man. It's for me, it's like sometimes when I'm going to bed, it gets the loudest in my head, like when I lay down,
Yeah.
and I cannot like shut off until I like finish my improvisation in my
Yeah.
head. You know what I mean?
That is so funny. So I'm not alone. That's
You're
a
not
beautiful
alone.
thing. I'm always like scales are always. I was talking to my same friend that I was talking about earlier, Danny Mayer. Like we were talking about that because when I was in Philly recently, I had to learn a bunch of these songs for the O'Teal and Friends gig, and it was like the day before, and it
Uh,
was a lot of songs that I kind of knew, but there was like a bunch of harder ones, and there was a bunch of Allman Brothers songs that have been in my head since I was a kid, but I never played them.
right, sure.
And he was like, "How the hell did you learn that so fast?" And I'm like, "Oh, because I like basically play this scale in my head constantly, and then like just knowing where it is, I can like I kind of that cycle you're talking about. It helps me learn like basically because we listened on the way down, the drive down. I was listening to the playlist of the songs, but I hadn't had my guitar out. But then when I had my guitar out, I didn't have to really learn it. I mean, it was good that I mapped it real fast, but it was
Yeah.
already in here because I'm always doing that. I'm always like
Well, even
pattern,
just that 1/4, having that 1/4 go back,
Yeah.
you end up getting so strong at intervallic relationships to anything between those two chords. It's
Yeah.
like it doesn't matter what you're listening to in the car or whatever. I'm immediately relating it to that. So
Yeah.
when it goes boom boom up to a 6 minor or whatever, and man, I remember like my first sessions here in LA, kind of coming to the realization that I'm a little more prepared than I thought I was actually.
Yeah.
Just from that, just from like, okay, and I'd never done it before, but I could have them put on the track and write my own chart very fast and know what was going on, even though it
Yeah.
wasn't something I'd ever done before. And it's
Yeah.
100% from that just nonstop narration.
Yeah, I think you're right. And then you learn these relative because I don't have perfect pitch, but that because of that weird obsessive mind thing, my relativity is always pretty much on. And like you're saying, so if I'm on a session, I can pretty much follow along without having to, sit down and map it. Um,
Yep.
and also in a weird way, I was never a good sight reader in terms of like as far as reading like lead sheets, I'm fine, but I'm always way faster to hear it and play it back.
Hmm.
And it's funny because I have to do a lot of gigs or a few gigs a year where there's parts and they're written out, and I'm always just like, let me hear it. And I kind of, in a certain way, not being good at reading has helped my ear, or at
Oh,
least
sure.
that's what I tell myself. Because I have to do it so often at this point that, learning a part, it's just gotta come.
For
But yeah, I
sure.
think I do attest a lot of that to kind of like, just like you're saying, when I'm cooking eggs or walking my dog, there's just music kind of happening.
Yeah. Yeah. So as an aside to that question, then, when you hear a piece of music you've never heard before, do you ever kind of pay attention to what your first thought is? Is it the melody, the groove? Is it what would I be playing right now on top of this? Like, what's your normal initial reaction?
I guess it depends how the song starts, but I'm always thinking about melody, and I'm always thinking about the next song I want to write too.
Yeah. Okay.
So a
Yeah.
lot of times I'll be like, "Oh man, that melody is cool." So I think it's different all the time. It's whatever speaks me to that song, but
Yeah.
or sometimes I'll be like, "Oh man, I want to write a song with that groove." I actually was listening to the Leon Bridges' new album today, and there was like one song that came on, and I was like, "Oh man, I've been wanting to write a song with that groove." And I went to my voice memo and just beatboxed the groove.
Nice.
And I'm sure the song will be completely different once it comes to fruition, if it ever does.
Right.
But
Sure.
but yeah, the songs that I like get inspired by, I usually pick out something about it, and then the really great stuff, you're like, "Oh man, that lyric with that melody combined is just amazing." So I think honestly, it's hard to answer that question because I feel like it's
Okay.
different every single time.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Number 5. When did you feel like you started to find your personal voice on guitar? Like, was there any clear moments of, hey, this is something a little different. I'm going to go further this way. You know?
Oh, that's interesting. Um, you know, I think there was like a time period. There was an album called Up Here that Soul Live made, and then another one called. Then in that same era, we did the Beatles Rubber Soul Live, and
Right.
in that era. I started like, because in the beginning of Soul Live, I was very much like trying to fill the shoes of like what I thought was supposed to be right for that band. I was like, organ
Okay.
trio, okay, I gotta like really get my like Grant Green kind of thing, and I was always trying to do my own thing with it, but there was
Mm.
a time where I said, fuck it, I'm gonna like let all of my influences out, because I grew up on Hendrix and Stevie Ray and rock and roll, and there was this, and so like I remember that like era in time where Soul Live started just like opening the floodgates. That was also like when Neil was like, "Fuck it, I'm gonna play clavinet. I'm gonna have a big ass bass stack." And we like incorporated lights into the show, and we got way more psychedelic and rock and roll. And I feel like during that time, I just was like developed a sound that to me was more me than it was before. And I
Sure.
think like I'm always evolving. I think on my newest album I've found something that's more um expressive in terms of like I'm playing less but saying more. Yeah, I think that's something that just happens as you get older,
Yeah,
you
definitely.
learn to say more with less. And so I think that's a constant learning curve and a constant evolution.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you definitely say more with less, or you just say it more directly, even if it's
Yeah.
a longer sentence. Still, you said it more simply. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Um, Crazy, man. It's interesting. It's like we build up, especially okay for someone who's played for as long as you have, and I guess as long as I have and have done a lot. For me, I had a lot of as a kid boxing myself into like, okay, if I play blues, I only play this. If I play jazz, I only play this. If I play whatever R&B, you're not allowed to cross these things together. And it was like all of a sudden moments of just like, this is bullshit. Like, just play at whatever you're hearing, whenever. And that's when when I started to feel like, oh, now I just sound like me. Not like I'm trying to be fucking the perfect Cornell Dupree on this song and the perfect John Scofield on this song and the perfect B.B. King on this song. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Cool. Number 6. What do you consider your biggest weakness on the guitar?
That's a good one. Sometimes I can't pull off what I'm thinking, and that's really a matter of shedding. It's like I know when right now I haven't been playing this past week, so sometimes like it just takes me a little while to get the rust off. Like when I've been playing every day, what's in my head will flow better to my fingers, but sometimes there's just blockage. You know what I mean? That's one thing, and then sometimes playing rhythm guitar while I'm singing is a challenge for me. I'm really bad at it. And I'm not quite cool enough to be B.B. King and just not, so that's something that I've been wanting to get better at. And that's the thing I'd say during quarantine, that's the thing I've been shedding the most is
Nice.
Playing my songs by myself. I go back to when I was a kid, my grandfather was always because I would sit there in the corner playing guitar, and he knew I was super into it, and he's like, all day you play guitar, you play me a song, goddammit, sing me a song, and I would always be like, I don't really do that, and I think about that now, and I'm like, that is important. I want to be able to sit down in front of with a group of people and play songs for a few hours and not be like, what am I going to do? I want to be able to entertain people by myself. So that's been kind of a thing for the last few years that I want to get better at and start doing more of, just playing solo sets,
Yeah, I mean it's something that you cannot even realize that it's something you've never done because it's something you don't even think about. You know what I mean? I can count on one hand the amount of solo full shows I've ever done. Yeah, right. You do little things at a radio station or one song in the set or this little thing, but to go on stage and play 90 minutes just a guitar and me and sing each song, I've never done it ever.
It's also the most nerve-wracking thing you could ever do. I always end up bringing someone in the last minute. I'm always I've booked a handful of them, and always I'm actually I'm bringing this bongo player. I'm gonna bring my friend to play acoustic with me. I did a couple Zoom sets over lockdown or quarantine where I had to do it, and that kind of jump started me being okay, I should be able to do this. I should be able to sit down and play for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and entertain people. So
yeah, it was funny when I first started singing. I was in the first real band I was in was a quartet. And when I started singing, it was terrible. I was, 13, 14 years old, but I kind of knew I needed to start trying anyways. But I didn't realize I wasn't really playing rhythm when I would sing because there was another guy there playing keys, or he played keys and guitar. He was like a utility cat. So when I turned 17 and that guy left and it became a trio, all of a sudden I realized, holy shit, I can't play and sing at the same time. We sound empty when I'm singing. Right. You know what I mean? And it was definitely necessity is the mother of, you had to drove that until now it's something I'm obsessive about. I get mad at myself if there's parts from the record that I can't play and sing at the same time.
Yeah.
All right, number 7. Who's a huge influence on your guitar playing that people would be surprised by?
I may have to think about that one for a second. Yeah, this might sound kind of weird, and people hate this guy's guitar playing, but I think Neil Young is a badass.
Oh yeah.
More tone and swagger wise.
Oh, definitely swagger. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know. I could have picked a lot of people. That one's just been on my mind because I just saw this documentary. I've seen a lot of documentaries in the past few months,
Oh,
in case you haven't noticed.
yeah.
But there's one called 1971, and it
Mhm.
talks about the whole creation of the song Ohio and the whole thing that
Yeah.
happened in Kent. And it got me into a whole Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young specifically because I grew up on that record Deja Vu. My mom was like a huge fan of CSN and CSNY. So, and then that Harvest record has been like back in my rotation recently. And there's some guitar shit on that record where it's like, it's also just something I would never really, a lot of the shit he does, like I just wouldn't naturally go to.
Right.
So but it's fucking cool.
Well, there's a supreme confidence
Yeah.
there, no
Yeah.
matter what he's playing, which is I always thought that was cool. Like, yeah, he was just
Yeah.
kind of like, "Fuck this," like, this is what
Yeah.
I do,
Yeah. Exactly.
which is really I love that. All right, that's a good one. All right, 8. We kind of talked about this already, but on a gig, would you rather be stuck with a great guitar and a shitty amp, or a great amp and a shitty guitar?
Oh man, that's hard. I think just because of what I've gone through in my life with shitty amps, I'm gonna go great amp, shitty guitar.
I'm the same.
You
Yeah.
know, just because I deal with, well, you know what it is, and Schofield actually was someone who like taught me this, is that, and for him it kind of relates to either or, so it wouldn't really um, influence my answer, but he finds ways. Like I remember we did this gig and the backline amp was like fucking up, making some weird fart noise, and he was using it in his shit. He was like,
Yeah.
and he was like, oh man, like I've been through so much shit. You can't ever get pissed. You just got to use it, you
Yeah.
know. And that was such a great thing to learn because like I used to get so pissed when my gear wasn't right or if a pedal broke and if
Yeah.
something and like I remember like that was a turning point for me. I was like, man, Schofield is the one of the greatest of all time. He still deals with that shit, but he lets it roll off and just works with it and makes it part of his thing, you know. And I've
Yeah.
always had my attitude has gotten so much better in the later years of like, oh, I got a shit amp. Oh, that's funny. Let's see how we deal with this. Like I still am pissed about it, you know, but I'll like work. It won't like ruin my fucking night. You know what I mean? I'll
Okay.
make it work. I'll make it work. Hopefully it works at all, you know, but,
Yeah.
but yeah, I would rather, you know, I don't know. There's something about, I kind of like shitty guitars. I know that might sound fucking weird, but
Yep.
like, it depends how shitty. Like if I can
Yeah.
as long as I can get all the notes out of it, all the
Yeah.
strings like work,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. It's like I'll have a much better gig with a good amp and some
Yeah.
headroom and a tone that's okay
Yeah.
and whatever guitar, as opposed to my personal guitar
Yeah.
and some amp that just is you can't possibly get anything good out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, number 9. What keeps you motivated to grow as a guitar player? Like what pushes you to keep like sitting down and actually putting in the time to work on new stuff? When it'd be easy to just sink into, we got plenty of work going on and things going on. What keeps you shedding?
You know, well, first off, I need to shed more. Is like something I've been like telling myself in these recent actually few months. But you know, honestly, hearing other players play, like when I heard you play at that Donovan show, I was like, man, there's some things that I need to learn from this dude, you know. And that happens all the time, you know. Like Eric Gales, like I watched some video of Eric Gales the other night, and that made me like start shedding this like that whole step ladder thing that he does, and I'm like, okay, I need to incorporate that into my playing. So yeah, sometimes it's just like hearing people that you admire. You know, I sometimes that can also discourage you. I've never had that attitude really though. I've always been like, when I hear great players, it makes me want to play. I know some people like hear great players and it makes them run away from their guitar. But for me, it makes me want to play. It makes me excited. It makes me excited about possibilities, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing. I've the same. I've never kind of gotten discouraged from watching. It's like, yeah, I could watch Julian Lage and go, oh, I'll never do that. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? But no, instead it makes me want to play my guitar,
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter if I will never do that. I'll
Yeah.
do something, I'll pick up one little thing from what I just listened to, and I think guys can sometimes get it in their head like that it's bad, to be content. It's not bad to like be happy with what you have and to be okay with like not knowing something. It's
Yeah.
fine. Like I'm okay with the fact that I can't play like Yngwie Malmsteen. If I
Right.
wanted to, I've proven it to myself. I'm willing to put in the time, so obviously it's not that important to me. You know what I mean?
Right. And again, man, it's one of those things like as you get older, you add things to your toolbox, but you're also like aware of like what your voice is. And you're confident in your voice, but also you want to, learn new linguistics,
Yep.
But yeah, I agree that I think at this point, there's certain things I can take away from like hearing George Benson like blow over jazz changes. Of course, I'm never going to be that, but there's certain things I'll take away from that, and that I could be like, oh, I could incorporate this little twist or this little turn, and I love that about guitar. It's like endless. There's endless options. There's endless inspiration,
Oh yeah. Literally daily, the spark gets lit over
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
something. Something happens, and it makes me want to play guitar every
Yeah,
day.
man. Yeah.
All right. Well, that leads us to number 10 then. Where do you want to be in 5 years? Like, are you a guy who makes plans and sets goals and that stuff's important? Or is it more just keep on keeping on and see what happens,
That's a good question. I'd say I'm kind of a combination of the two. Having a young child kind of changes that a little, as you
Oh, yeah.
probably know. And I want to like have a comfortable living in a comfortable living space for my family. So I'd say like, at the very at the at the very top of my priority list is to do things that I love. You know what I mean? And to eliminate the things that I don't love. And I think part of that is figuring out what those things are. I
Yeah.
think that's you know what I mean? And that's something that I'm always learning is like now it's a lot easier for me, like when an offer or a gig comes in or something, it's a lot easier for me to determine now if it's going to be fun for me, if it's going to be creatively fulfilling, if it's going to be challenging in the right ways. So I think really it's just about creating more things that I love to do, man, and like creating more records as a solo artist. Like I'm already working on the record that's not out, and
Sure.
I have a lot of like specific projects, but really just want to make records and do shows that I love and that I'm really proud of. It sounds very basic, but and also like create a comfortable living. For me, I don't want to make bazillions of dollars and then be stressed out day to day, trying to maintain all the things that come along with that.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to figure that out. That like the universe gives you exactly what you can handle. Like that's a real thing. So
Oh, yeah.
I
Yeah. I
think
mean,
I think day to day happiness is absolute number one.
100%. Like, dude, if you can find any way to really, enjoy what you do that is still responsible enough for you to handle your business with now that you have a family, which is what I figured out. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, can I still do something I like and not put my family in jeopardy? Well, then I won. I already won. Like, that's the best
Yeah.
thing I could do. And then just making that better all the time without making making it the other way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, dude, that's it. We reached the end of the 10 questions. I'll put links to everything Eric Krasno in the description of this video. And if you're a ruler, hang on, we'll do turn 2. And if you're not a ruler, you should become one or at least subscribe to the channel. But, dude, thank you for doing this, man. A pleasure to
Absolutely,
talk to
man.
you and hear your
Oh, it's a
story.
pleasure, man. I really want to either invite you over here or I'll come over there and do like a little hang and play sesh.
Let's do it, man.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm around for a little while. I've got a couple gigs in the next month or two, but we'll make a plan.
No, I'm around. I'm
Cool.
around. All right. All right, everybody. We'll be right back. Thanks. Ruling, dude.